Did you hear about this interest rate hike?
What hike? There's no hike. Bro, I'm a homeowner. I know if there's a hike or not.
Mo's like he's got his eyes right on the rate.
That's how Ali was introducing the topic, Mo. That's what he's trying to get into.
Ah, man gave me a heart attack.
I guess it was a hold, and this is why we prepare.
That's awesome. But yeah, there was no hike. So tell us about that. When was that released, Mo? Do you know?
A couple weeks ago, like maybe last week.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it was.
I think this is the second rate hold. Actually, this is the
Yeah.
second time they've announced a rate hold.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's back to back.
It's interesting. Like, what there is a lot of factors, right? In terms of real estate prices, they've held the rate twice, so people are like they feel confident about inflation. Inflation numbers came out, and it seems like inflation is kind of going down, or it's kind of steadied. And
Yeah, I think the latest numbers
so-
are 4.5% year over year for inflation, which is a lot. Don't get me wrong, but it's down from like the crazy numbers of like 6-7%.
Yeah, exactly. And then so inflation, interest rates hold. People have a bit more confidence that the prices will now stabilize, quote unquote. But because of that, prices will actually skyrocket a little bit more. So because people feel a bit more confident that the interest rates won't go higher, they are willing to pay a little bit more, even though the prices are still crazy. But they're less than COVID prices, which I guess helps. I don't know.
I mean, it's interesting because I think Royal LePage redid their estimates for house prices, and they were predicting like I think a percentage decrease in price. And I think they had to update that to like a 4.5% increase in price, which is a huge turnaround. It's like a 5% turnaround. Damn.
Yeah.
I think more than that, more than just the holding of the interest rates. I think it's also that the fact that inventory in terms of the houses up for listings, like for sale, is really low still. And so there isn't much in the market. And so when something comes out that is decent looking or a good property, then you have a lot of people jumping on it because there's nothing else to look at. And so that's probably another reason why we're seeing a slight spike in the house prices, because you got people bidding multiple offers on properties now, even with the high interest rates and everything. And that comes solely down to just not being able to look at too many properties and not enough properties being available on the market.
Supply is low. Supply isn't increasing with new builds either, because of the expensive costs of building, right? So there's a lot of factors. There are conflicting factors as well. Like I feel like a vast majority of people, when they start refinancing after their term finishes with these high interest rates, like a lot of people do have fixed rates. So when those people come due and now they can't refinance at the much higher rates, what happens, right? They're forced to sell. And when there's forced sellers and there's no buyers, there's a crash, right?
No, what's interesting is I hear what you're saying, Cole, about the refis coming up and whether people can sustain those mortgage payments, which for some people might be double what they've been paying or more. But the flip side to that is, are the banks going to let that happen? And there's talk about, I think in the US already, I think you can get 35 or 40-year mortgages now.
I think 50.
You can get ridiculous fixed mortgages, not like there's no renewal, dude. You can get a fixed rate.
Yeah, but the normal is still 30 years in the US, but now you're able to get, as Ali said, perhaps 50 years even.
I believe.
Okay, so
that's not even 30 years amortized at 30 years. It's actually 30-year terms, which are insane.
Yeah, well, there's that too. But I could see something similar happening in Canada, not from the term aspect, but just the amortization aspect, where you could have longer amortizations, 35, 40, 45, 50 years, and then the terms
100 years. I think that's the thing in Japan.
Like
in some Asian countries, yeah, because it's so expensive that like there's no hope to pay it off in a lifetime. So
I thought we were just saying larger numbers, so I was gonna be like 150. No, I'm just kidding.
It's real.
200.
Like
yeah, no.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Can I get a 250? 250? Anyone? 250? Going once, going twice.
So
When it eventually turn into like where most of the rest of the world is not on, like it's just renting is very common. Because I think at 100 years, you might as well just rent.
No, in 100 years, your grandkids will own the property. and they can rent it out.
It's about legacy, bro.
Legacy, generational wealth.
Man's clearly didn't listen to Jay-Z's OJ.
Neither did I.
Neither did I.
Oh, come on. It's a great song. It has a ton of financial advice.
I'll check that out. No, but that's fair though, Trent. I think you're right. Like the amortization terms will go higher. The only thing I see though is even if they go higher, people might be able to afford it, but it's if banks can actually make that bet. Like we know what's happening in the US with banks right now. The whole issue was that they had to take that cash float, invest it, and it's actually not going to be sustainable for their people and depositors and things like that. So it's like when the bank's balance sheets aren't adding up, will these mortgages come due, right? Are they able to offer those terms which are like longer and things along those lines, right? They might not be able to offer those favorable results. You can when there's enough credit in the system, I feel, but much harder when there isn't enough credit, right? And so then they have to be very cognizant. Like right now, TD Bank is the most shorted bank in the world.
Yeah.
Right?
It's
one of the largest banks.
Yeah, they have exposure to the States. That's why. But in my opinion, I'm a huge fan of TD just because I bank with them. I think it's a dumb short. It makes no sense. Like whatever American TD banks will fail will not break TD Canada.
100%. I agree. Like I bank with literally everything. All my services are with TD right now. Right? My mortgage, everything. Yeah. Though I think that's a bit dumb, but I should probably go to different banks. But I don't have enough cash in there that the FDIC insurance will cover it, so I'm below that. Don't worry.
I think when we compare American banks to Canadian banks, it's a different level. Like Canadian banks are like ridiculously regulated, not ridiculously, like strongly regulated, and they are a lot bigger than American banks. Like compare it this way. TD owns the Celtics court, right? It's what is it? TD Center? I don't know what it's called, but I can't name a bank in the States that has NBA sponsorship. TD America is not even TD's main business.
Right. I know there's like a Fiserv center.
Yeah, there's Fiserv. FTX used to have something. I forget where. Maybe
in Miami. In Miami.
Yeah.
Yeah, the FTX arena.
But yeah, no, I get your point.
TD Garden.
That's
what it's called. My bad.
Oh, that's in Boston. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's in Boston. The Boston Celtics play there.
So they do. I agree with you. Like TD Canada is not going anywhere. I think the only reason it's the most shorted is because they're trying to buy this other bank right now in the U.S. and they're saying they basically overpaid relative to what's going on with the banks right now, the regional banks. And so it's like it was a dumb play now, but back then it was a fine play, right? And so with all that's coming out, that's why they're shorting it, because once they buy it, they're buying an asset that's not worth much. And so sometimes the markets do determine what happens. Like even though they buy it, the outcome of that bank buyout or acquisition might play out in 5 years. But in the meantime, the stock price will take a dip, which might actually allow the shorts to play out properly as expected. That's the issue. You know what I mean? But I agree with you. Like I think it's not going to make TD bankrupt in Canada by any means. Not just yet.
The question I have though, given the current market, would for a first time home buyer, as like someone looking a family home or as an investor, do you recommend jumping in this market? Do you guys recommend like waiting it out and seeing where the cards are dealt?
I think it comes down to your cash flows and what your goals are. Really, like each individual scenario is different, right? If it's someone that can handle the monthly payments and is looking for a property to live in for a long term, and by long term I mean say more than 5 years, like 5 to 10 years, I'd consider long term, right? So if it's that long, then and their cash flows make sense where they can sustain the mortgage payments, then it may make sense. But for someone else who's strapped, then it may not make sense. And then same thing with from an investment standpoint. If you're able to cash flow positively based on the existing interest rate and the mortgage payments and all the other costs involved, then yeah, sure, makes sense, right? I think it just comes down to the numbers and whether it works in your scenario.
Like I know rents are high, but like even then, with an investment property, are you able to capture enough rent to cover, like, I know covering mortgage is easy in a low interest environment, but now that we have 4.5 interest rate as a base, like, is that still viable?
I think it's extremely difficult to find cash flowing stuff right now.
Depending how much you put down. There's some people that put down more than the common 20% that you put down on property.
And
So
you
what
also
that
have to make sure that your return, like year over year return, are positive still as well. Like you can put 100, you can put the full money down, but then is what you're like. Let's say you put 100% down, you pay for it cash, then you can do better by putting that money elsewhere. You get what I'm trying
That's
to say?
fair, yeah.
If you're not
Like,
getting
yeah.
8% return minimum.
Yeah, that's fair. But we don't know what people are actually doing that are doing that. Because the other day I saw something pop up on, was it Facebook? Yeah, it was Facebook. It was a house in Mississauga. It sold for, I'd like to say it was in the between 1.3 to 1.4 mil. Okay, and I think it was a 3 to 4 bedroom house. And it was a realtor that posted it. And then she mentioned that it was recently sold and that the buyers are going to put it on the market for renting. And I believe the rent that they were putting it up for was 4,500 a month.
Yeah,
So
that
yeah,
makes sense.
you can get that much in rent. It's insane. It's
That
insane.
house will probably be back for sale for lower than what they paid, thinking they're gonna get 4,500 in a couple months.
Yeah, and
I
what's
mean,
funny,
us.
I remember reading the post, and the people that purchased it, they purchased it when the market was crazy, and I think they purchased it for like 1.8, 1.9, and they sold it for 1.3 to 1.4. So the ones who sold at a loss. Yeah, it's crazy.
That's a
Yeah,
tough bullet. Like,
yeah.
I get 4,500 for renting a house sounds crazy, but what's also crazy is that the average rent in Toronto is 2,500 for a single bedroom.
For a single bed box
That is nuts.
versus an entire house, right? This not doesn't sound so bad.
Yeah.
I was paying a
Jeez.
grand
Yeah.
for an entire. I mean, granted, this is not Toronto, but I paid a grand, including utilities, for an entire basement apartment in Montreal, like 30 minutes from downtown. And to come back to see $2,500 rent for a
Yeah.
shoebox, that's wild.
You'll be
Yeah,
like, thank God.
guys, you remember how much you paid for rent back in university?
Oh my God.
But
How much was it? Like
that
350, 400, right?
Yeah.
It's 700 plus now in Hamilton. It's like 800 for some of those rooms.
I
Yo,
remember
some-
when we were looking, Mo, we were like we were kind of browsing and all that kind of stuff, and we saw like how much you're like paying for, like 450, 500, I think.
Like, I think 500 was for
We were just like,
what? Yeah, no, 500 was for the room across the street from the university. Like, literally,
yeah,
the university's here, the house is here.
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
500.
That was
Yeah,
500,
that's
I
true.
remember.
That's true. Or
Yeah,
or
yeah.
you'll get like a nice big room, nice windows, main floor. Yeah. Fully renovated. Like those were $500.
I was shocked. But that's crazy.
Yeah, man. People are moving from like past the student. I don't want to say student ghetto, but like they're moving down to like Hamilton downtown, up the mountain. Like
muting?
you got to right. East Hamilton. Like, luckily, it's going from East Hamilton to Mac is pretty simple.
Out there? Like,
Huh?
Are they finding rentals by the room out there?
I mean, East Hamilton is a wondrous and scary place. I'm sure they'll find a lot of
You'll
things.
find something.
Yeah.
At least a cardboard.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I would kind of give going back to the question, Mo. I would kind of give similar advice to Turan, right? Like, if you can afford it, I think it would be good to get in, because the way it works in my eyes, and you guys can kind of tell me and keep me honest here. Like, this is my kind of theory: is the prices right now, right, are lower than they were before, right? Obviously, and so they have steeped down because of the high interest rates, and that's exactly what the banks expected, right? They've come lower. It's harder the affordability is basically the same, if not harder a little bit, right? Because of the high interest rates. So for that reason, it's harder to make the payments. But if you get a variable rate right now, because it looks like it'll go down, and it looks like they're probably going to bring interest rates down by the end of the year, or maybe in a year or so.
Yeah, I think market's pricing like a 50-point rate cut by the end of the year, but
Yeah. Okay.
nothing certain.
So if that's the case, it's like the best thing to do right now is you buy the property, right? By the end of the year, interest rates go down, then you get a fixed rate. Refinance, get a fixed rate at that point,
I
right?
think that just comes down
And
to your risk adversity, right? Can
Yeah, that
you
too.
swallow that risk and like
yeah, so it's like if you can, when you're running your numbers, I would run them at the actual prime rate, not what you're getting from the banks. Run it at like 6.85 right now, right? Run it at 7, and if you can afford 7, then you could definitely afford 5 or whatever, 5.85 or 4.95 what you're getting right now from the banks for certain variable rates, and then you will likely get lower and then get that at a fixed rate for the next 5 years. So even if it does go to up 7, then you can at least swallow that. And what that does is your price, you bought at a base lower price, and then in a year's time you get a lower interest rates most likely, and then because of the lower interest rates you've just gained equity because prices are going to skyrocket at that point, right? And with the de-dollarization happening and your dollar getting cheaper,
Devalued. Yeah.
devalued, your currency inflates, in which case prices still rise up because of that as well. So you're getting double the benefit. So at that point, you can check out, right? And then buy something a little bit more in your range, if you will, or something along those lines.
And also as the devaluation happens to the currency and the asset prices rise, what's happening is if you have fixed debt, you're actually paying fixed debt with devaluing dollars. So the dollars that are not worth as much in the future, but because your debt is fixed, it's actually beneficial to you, and that's another plus from that. I have a contrarian argument to make with the whole idea, and I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on this, with the whole idea of home ownership. Okay, so it's a thing in especially North American society to own your own home, right? A lot of people, that's one of their main goals. So the view I have, and I've been thinking about this over the last couple of years, about a year or so, like having when you own a own home, yes, it's a great achievement, and you could build some equity. But I think it is a real liability, and here's why. I think about it from a cash flow standpoint. There's the old adage, right? House rich, cash poor. And so I never really understood that properly until recently, when if you actually study your mortgage payment and you break it apart, and you realize that about 50% or more of your mortgage payment is actually going towards the interest and not the principal. And so we get so focused on the mortgage interest rate that we lose sight on how much interest volume that we're actually paying. And then I was like, oh wow, because then if you keep those mortgage payments going, and the way it is in Canada, we renew every 5 years as an example for the terms, right? And so your interest payments go really high over time, and you end up paying so much more for the house. And at the same time, during the time that you're in that house, you have these mortgage payments to make, and the principal amount is not going down that much because 50% or more is going to the interest. So I've been actually thinking about home ownership is actually not what it used to be in terms of it being beneficial to you. And I actually think you're better off buying investment properties that cash flow, and then using the cash flow to either cover the mortgage of a home that you purchase, that you're going to live in as a principal residence, or use that to maybe rent somewhere. What do you guys think about that?
I think that's great advice. But I think if you're getting started on the
It's
market,
not advice,
like,
not advice
okay.
at all. It's just my opinion.
I think what Ali said, like if you can stomach that risk, that's a good play. But like I think for most people, they just don't want to take that risk, and they don't want the extra overhead of owning an investment property to fund their living residence, right?
Yeah, why not?
I also don't think it's as easy just to get a rental. Like to get a rental property, you're acting on numbers, right? You gotta cash flow. You gotta figure out the numbers, make sure it actually work. When you get buying a personal home, it's more about what you really value it, right? So I think it's a lot harder to find a rental than a personal property as well.
I think it's also like you have to deal with renters, right? Like there's always the risk of a renter like absolutely trashing your place. Like I think we've talked about this before. Like renting is not easy way to get money. It's still work, right? And some people can and want to take on that grind, and some people they just it's not worth it to them, right? Some it's just the benefit to cost doesn't work out in their favor.
I think if you were to put two properties, one's personal, one's rental, a rental that's not like in bad shape and stuff where you gotta like deal with renovations, like most saying, like some people just don't have the time or capacity or the knowledge to do that. So if you have like one property that's a rental, one property that's like a personal, I would take the rental every single day. I enjoy it because right now we're renting ourselves, and I very much love renting. Not
Why
having
is
to
that?
worry about anything is like amazing, right? And we're even in a building, so like the grass cutting, the shoveling, all that stuff is like just not even an equation. So I completely agree about it. Even I think it's Grant Cardone, like live where you live,
Rent where you live, and
and then
I forget the rest of it.
Rent where you live. Wow. Wow.
But no, I get what he was saying, Ali. Basically, you rent your primary residence, but you own everything else.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's easier said than that.
Yeah, it's definitely easier said than done. Though I agree with that perspective, as what Taran was saying, and Ali, what you're saying is like it is easier said than done, but it makes sense. And the reason it makes sense is with your primary residence, you're paying the mortgage and the interest, right?
Yeah.
With the rent, you're not paying that. It's cash coming in, and expenses are being paid for by the cash flow that's coming in, right? And then you might argue, well, rent is going out, right? Rent is also an expense, and that's fully going out. In the previous markets, now it probably less, but in the previous markets, you're also not putting down the frickin' 150K for that rental property. It's like extra cash on hand, and you're just paying the rent. And also, it's likely less than the full mortgage amount that person has been paying, right? Like, or how much you would have to pay to mortgage a house, the same amount in terms of square footage, all that kind of stuff. So it's like if someone's getting into rental property right now at 1.3, 1.4, and they're putting like nothing down, just the bare minimum, then you might be paying as much as they're paying for mortgage rates. But if they bought a property like 5 years ago where the mortgage payment, it's like paid off a little bit and all that kind of stuff, they can charge competitive rates in terms of rent. And when you get into a property, you're not paying $6,000 for a house. You're probably paying $3,500, $4,000, which you wouldn't be able to do at 6. You know what I mean? So you're saving on that $2,000 that you would have to do if you put down a down payment plus you're paying the mortgage.
Yeah, I think this goes into what Ali's saying. Like, if you are basing your numbers on what you can charge for rent right now, you're probably not cash flow positive. But given the current, I guess, expected trajectories of interest rates and house prices, you're probably looking to benefit in the long term. So it's really about if you can risk, I guess, like all these factors in the short term for long-term gain, right? Because I think another thing you missed out on is that if you're charging rent based on what you're like to cover or proportional to the mortgage rate you are paying now, and when mortgage rates do or when they do go down, you'll be paying less mortgage. But since you already set a high rent, you can bump it up that 2%, right? Because that is the limit you have. Whereas people that started off at a competitive rate, they're capped at a lower, I guess, yearly increase.
Yeah, for sure. I would say though is one point about what Trent you were saying about the mortgage payments and the interest and all that kind of stuff and how much you're paying. You generally pay more interest at the front end of your amortization like period, and it starts getting smaller and smaller because of the fact that you're paying down your principal more and more, right? So the 50% of the principal you're paying the first 5 years is not making a dent in terms of how much interest you still get charged on that amount. So it just gets larger and larger. You've seen those graphs. I think you've made those graphs, right? Where it's like the interest rate starts getting smaller and then the principal starts getting bigger and bigger as time goes on. And I would say,
I don't think anyone said anything. No,
Trent said something.
Even after renewing the term?
Yeah, because now your amount is less, right? The amount you're renewing with is like less mortgage than
that's fair, but isn't the volume of interest still about 50%?
No. Interest,
it's a curve.
Like interest rate.
So it is a curve. So your principal starts getting bigger, and then your interest rate starts getting smaller and smaller because they still amortize it at the same amount, right? So after 30 years, then it's 25 years, right? Like all that kind of stuff. So I think it starts getting smaller. Another thing I would recommend to new home buyers is do bi-weekly, right? Or whatever, it's bi-monthly, whatever. I always get confused with that. Like every 2 weeks.
Yeah, bi-weekly.
Or do it or do it weekly if you can, and I think in certain cases you can. What that does is it decreases your mortgage amount quicker, and so you're paying less interest over time.
And I think there's a few other tricks. Isn't there a trick you make like a 13 month payment or something once a year?
Yeah,
'Cause I
exactly.
think there's also a con. Like you also don't want to just, let's say you had like 100 grand extra. You don't want to just put it in. I don't think it's just dump as much as you can either.
No, I think like if you increase your payment by like, I don't know, like $200 or something, they say you can get it. It's like, it's a
There's
crazy
a
amount.
limit.
Like it's
I
like
don't think it's like
it's based on your mortgage. There's like mortgage clauses as well, how much you can pay, right? And depending on the mortgage, they'll say you're capped at 2 months rent or something, or 2 months mortgage rate, whatever. But at the same time, even if you increase your payment by $200 or something, there are calculators. It's like it decreases your payment from 30 years to 15 years, so you can pay off your house in 15.
Yeah,
right?
Say
definitely
less.
speeds it up. Speeds it up for sure.
It's
Okay,
actually
well,
it's actually crazy. You do the calculation. There's like calculators online. It's insane how quickly you start paying it off with just an increase.